Everyone thinks karma is just a story. Until my son and daughter-in-law called me a useless old wreck, threw me out, and took everything. 2 years later, they were begging on their knees. If you want to see real karma, subscribe and watch till the end.
Listen to me, dear. Come a little closer. I want you to hear every word of this, because what I'm about to tell you is not just my story. It's the story of how everything you think you know about family can shatter in a single afternoon. My name is Margaret, though most people who once loved me called me Peggy. I am 72 years old now, and for more than 40 years I poured my life into one person, my son David. After his father passed when David was only 9, it was just the two of us against the world. I worked long shifts at the factory, then cleaned offices at night. I went without new shoes so he could have school trips. I skipped holidays so he could go to university. Every sacrifice felt like love, and I believed love like that could never be thrown away. When David met Sarah, I welcomed her with open arms. She was bright, ambitious, full of plans. I saw how happy she made him, and that was enough for me. I helped them buy their first proper home. Actually, it was my own house I signed over to them. For the family, I said, smiling as I watched them carry their boxes inside. I told myself I was making room for the next generation. How could I know I was signing away my future? In the beginning, it felt like a blessing. Little Emily arrived first, then Oliver 2 years later. Those children became my whole world. I would walk to their house every morning, rain or shine, with a bag full of homemade biscuits and stories from my own childhood. Emily would climb into my lap and beg for the one about the old oak tree in the village. Oliver loved when I let him help me bake. Sarah used to thank me then. She would say, "Mum, I don't know what we'd do without you." I believed her. But cracks have a way of appearing slowly, don't they? At first they were small. A sharp look when I stayed a little too long. A sigh when I offered to watch the children so they could go out. Then came the comments I tried to ignore. "Mum's always here, isn't she?" Sarah would say to David when she thought I couldn't hear. I told myself she was just tired. Young mothers are tired. I had been tired once too. Then came the day that still echoes in my bones. It was a grey Thursday afternoon in October, the kind of day where the light never quite arrives. I was sitting in the living room of the house that used to be mine, with little Emily on my lap. We were turning the pages of an old photograph album, laughing softly at pictures of David when he was her age. The smell of fresh tea still lingered in the air. Everything felt peaceful. Sarah burst through the door, her face tight with irritation over some forgotten errand. She stopped when she saw me. For a moment, the room went still. Then her voice cut through the quiet like broken glass. "You're nothing but a useless old wreck, Peggy. You do nothing but take up space and eat our food. We don't need you anymore." The words landed so heavily I felt them in my chest. Emily froze in my arms. I looked at my son, standing behind his wife. I waited for him to say something, anything, a single word of defense. But David only stared at the floor, his jaw tight, saying nothing. In that silence, something inside me cracked wide open. A week later, I received a letter from a solicitor. They had changed the locks. The house I had given them was now officially theirs, and I was no longer welcome. My pension, which I had foolishly agreed to put into a joint account years earlier, for safety, stopped appearing in my account. My phone calls went unanswered. When I turned up at the door one rainy evening, Sarah opened it just enough to say, "The children are busy. Please don't come back." I stood on that doorstep with one small suitcase, the rain soaking through my coat. and realized I had become invisible to the only family I had left. That was the night I learned how quickly love can turn into a locked door. Those first weeks after the door closed behind me were like walking through a dream I couldn't wake from. I had nowhere to go, so I dragged my small suitcase through the rain to the only person who still answered my calls, my old friend Dorothy, who lived in a tiny one-bedroom flat on the edge of town. She gave me the sofa without hesitation, but it was far too short for my aching back. Every night I lay there listening to the clock tick, feeling the weight of 70 years pressing down on my chest. I kept replaying that afternoon in my mind, over and over, like a broken film reel. The way Sarah's voice had sliced through the air, the way David had looked at the carpet instead of at his own mother, the way little Emily's small hands had tightened on my sleeve, as if she understood something terrible was happening, but didn't have the words for it. Some mornings I would wake up and for a few blessed seconds forget. Then reality would crash back in. No more morning walks with the children. No more warm kitchen filled with the smell of baking. No more soft voices calling me Nana. I had become a ghost in my own family's story. Money, of course, became the sharpest knife. Without my pension, I had almost nothing. Dorothy helped as much as she could, but she was living on her own state pension, too. I started skipping meals so I wouldn't be a burden. I sold the few pieces of jewelry I had left. My wedding ring, a small gold locket with David's baby photo inside. Each time something left my hands, another piece of my dignity seemed to go with it. The worst pain, though, wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the silence from the people I had loved most. I would sit by the window in Dorothy's flat and watch families walking past. Grandmothers holding little hands, laughing together, and I would wonder, how can the same blood that once ran warm in my veins now feel so icy cold? I tried to call David a few times. The first time the phone rang and rang. The second time Sarah answered. Her voice was sharp, almost triumphant. "He doesn't want to speak to you, Peggy. You've done enough. Stop harassing us." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, feeling something inside me wither. The worst pain, though, wasn't the cold or the hunger. It was the silence from the people I had loved most. I would sit by the window in Dorothy's flat and watch families walking past, grandmothers holding little hands, laughing together, and I would wonder, how can the same blood that once ran warm in my veins now feel so icy cold? I tried to call David a few times. The first time the phone rang and rang. The second time Sarah answered. Her voice was sharp, almost triumphant. "He doesn't want to speak to you, Peggy. You've done enough. Stop harassing us." Then the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a long time, feeling something inside me wither. There were nights when the anger rose so fiercely, I thought it might choke me. I imagined marching back to that house and demanding they look me in the eye. But then I remembered Emily and Oliver. I didn't want them to see their Nana broken and shouting, so I swallowed the rage, night after night, until it turned into a quiet, heavy stone lodged deep in my chest. Months passed. Winter came, bringing its own kind of cruelty. The heating in Dorothy's flat was old and unreliable. I would wrap myself in 2 cardigans and an old blanket, sitting in the armchair with a cup of weak tea, thinking about the grandchildren I was no longer allowed to see. I heard through a mutual neighbor that Emily had started asking for me at bedtime. "Where's Nana Peggy? Why doesn't she come anymore?" Sarah apparently told her I was poorly and couldn't visit. A child's heart knows when it's being lied to. I began to talk to myself in the quiet hours, not out of madness, but out of sheer loneliness. I would whisper the old lullabies I used to sing to David when he was small. Sometimes I spoke directly to the universe, or to God, or to whatever force watches over old women who have been thrown away. Why? I would ask the darkness. I gave everything. I asked for nothing in return. Was my love really so worthless? The silence that answered felt heavier than any words Sarah had ever spoken. Yet, even in that deep winter of the soul, something stubborn refused to die inside me. A small, quiet voice that whispered, "You are still Margaret. You are still worthy of breath and morning light." I held on to that voice like a candle in the wind. I didn't know if it would be enough, but it was all I had left. Little did I know that far away, in the house that used to be mine, the first cracks in their perfect life had already begun to appear. Cracks that would soon widen into something no amount of money or pride could repair. 2 long, bitter years dragged by like slow wounds that refused to heal. I had moved from Dorothy's sofa into a tiny rented room above an old newsagent's shop. The walls were thin, the window let in draughts, and the smell of damp never quite left the air. But it was mine. For the first time in decades, I paid rent with my own hands, however small the amount. I had found a part-time job helping in a charity shop 3 mornings a week. The work was simple, sorting clothes, smiling at customers, but it gave me back a sliver of dignity. Then, one ordinary Tuesday evening in late October, everything changed again. There was a soft, hesitant knock at my door. When I opened it, the cold corridor light fell on 2 figures I barely recognized at first. Sarah stood there, soaked from the rain, her once perfect hair plastered to her face. She was on her knees right there on the worn carpet of the landing. Behind her, half hidden in shadow, was David. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes hollow. He looked 10 years older than the last time I had seen him. Sarah lifted her head. Her voice cracked before she even spoke. "Margaret, Peggy, please." She swallowed hard, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "We've lost everything. The house is gone. The bank took it last month. David's job disappeared when the company folded. My business, it collapsed after customers found out about the shortcuts I took. We're drowning in debt. We have nowhere to live. The children, Emily and Oliver, cry for you every single night. They keep asking why Nana Peggy doesn't come anymore." Her hands trembled as she reached out, not daring to touch me. "I was cruel. God help me. I was so cruel. I called you a useless old wreck. I pushed you out of your own home. I took your pension, your peace, your grandchildren. I thought we were stronger without you. I thought you were holding us back. But the moment you left, everything started falling apart. It was as if the light went out of our lives the day we locked that door behind you." David finally stepped forward. His voice was barely a whisper. "Mum, I failed you." I stood there and said nothing. "I chose silence over blood. I don't expect you to forgive me, but the children need you, and I need you. We all do." I stood in the doorway for what felt like an eternity. The rain drummed steadily on the window at the end of the corridor. My heart, which had been frozen for so long, ached with 1,000 memories, both beautiful and painful. I saw the little boy who once fell asleep in my arms after his father died. I saw the young man who brought Sarah home with pride in his eyes. I saw the frightened woman on her knees, who had once laughed in my kitchen, and then I saw myself, not as the useless old wreck they had named me, but as the woman who had loved without measure, who had given without keeping score. Slowly I stepped aside and opened the door wider. "Come in out of the rain," I said quietly. "Both of you." That night we sat at my small wooden table under the dim lamplight. The children were staying with a neighbor, But Sarah and David poured out the whole truth, how arrogance had blinded them, how they had convinced themselves that cutting me off would make their lives lighter, freer, richer, how instead, step by step, their world had crumbled. Contracts dried up, friends distanced themselves. Even the neighbors who once envied them now looked the other way. Sarah cried as she spoke. Not the dramatic tears of someone performing regret, but the quiet, exhausted tears of someone who had finally seen herself clearly. I thought strength was pushing everyone away, she whispered. I didn't understand that real strength was what you gave us every single day without ever asking for thanks. I listened without interrupting. When they finished, the room fell into a gentle silence. I don't know whether it was karma or justice or simply life completing its circle. But I do know this. What we throw into the world eventually finds its way back to us, sometimes as a gentle breeze, and sometimes as a storm that strips away every false layer we have built. I did not forget the pain, the locked door, the cold words, the lonely nights. They are still part of me, but I chose not to let bitterness become my final story. Today, Emily and Oliver come to my little room after school. We bake biscuits together again, though now the kitchen is smaller and the table older. Emily still asks for the story about the old oak tree. Oliver still helps me stir the mixture, getting flour on his nose. Sarah calls me Margaret now, with a softness she never had before. David has started coming round on Sundays, bringing small gifts. Nothing expensive, just tokens of quiet remorse. I am no longer the center of their grand life. I am simply Nana Peggy again, and that, I have learned, is more than enough. So if you are listening to me tonight, and someone has called you useless, or old, or a burden, hold your head a little higher. Stay kind, but never let them convince you that your worth depends on their approval. The world has a long memory, and sometimes, just sometimes, it brings people back to your door, not as conquerors, but as humbled souls who finally understand what they once threw away. I am Margaret. I am 72, and I am still here. Thank you for sitting with an old woman and listening to her story. If it moved you, leave a kind word below. Tell me, has life ever shown you its quiet justice? I read every message. Perhaps your story will be the next one whispered in the lamplight. God bless you, dear. Take care of those who grow old before you, because one day that chair by the window may be yours.